So welcome once again, everybody, to the Kentuckiana Developers Group. And this week, or this month, we've got a presenter, Michael Layne, who I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Pause on Error last year and in October. And I got to sit in on his session on data API and web integration. And I also got to pick his brain and get a lot of information. Unfortunately, I didn't notate very well and I lost a lot of that information. So hopefully I'll have a chance to ask those questions again. But so Michael's going to kind of walk us through a little bit about some FileMaker data API and web integration. And with that, Michael, if you'd like to take over, you should be able to share.
May I introduce a little bit more?
Sure.
Michael and I co-presented at Pause several years ago in Cleveland, if you remember that, Michael. We shared a time. Had a nice big crowd. That was a huge crowd. They came out to see Michael, and I was also on the bill. But anyway, nice to see you again, Mike.
You too, Jonathan. You too. I thought I recognized you, and then I heard your voice, and I knew who it was. Great. Well, thank you. And Ron, yeah, we Pause on Error in October was really nice to get together after a lot of strangeness over the last year and a half before that. So yeah, I spent a lot of time talking to Ron actually, and it was one of the highlights of the week. So let me share my screen and start sharing. I'm going to share my whole desktop, and then I'm going to start doing this. So does everyone see a slide, or anyone see a slide? Okay, great. Well, so it's an honor to be here. Ron, I really appreciate you inviting me to speak. I do have a handful of slides, but we're definitely going to get into some FileMaker and some non-FileMaker. But I have some slides that I want to walk through to set some things up about security and about some of the technologies that I use. And really, before I begin, I realized I was thinking about this presentation earlier today, and I have kind of spent my whole career with one foot inside of FileMaker and one foot outside. And this presentation is really a culmination of that, and it pretty much speaks to exactly where I am with what I do. So hopefully that makes sense. So we're gonna go from FileMaker to non-FileMaker. So we are going to look at a large, mission-critical, complex internal system, and we're going to extract a little piece of it that is something that the organization that we built the solution for a few years back, they wanted to expose some small piece of their solution to clients in a browser, on the phone, on a laptop, on a tablet. And you'll notice it says it does not involve WebDirect. So my 2 seconds worth about WebDirect is, I know it's a great technology. I think it's come an awful long way since version 1, but because I have always been sort of a web developer as well, I've actually never done a WebDirect project in my life, because I've always sort of been outside of FileMaker. And then when I do FileMaker integration, I go back, and I'm sure some of you will remember CDML and Lasso and some of those technologies. And then fx.php came out, I don't know when, at least maybe 15 or 20 years ago. I used that heavily. I used ODBC heavily. I actually never used the PHP API because I just stuck with fx, because the amount of work I was doing that satisfied all my needs. And along the way, I did a lot more web development, integrations, APIs. And so when the data API came out, boy, I was so happy. And I continue to be very happy to use it while developing FileMaker solutions for the web. So we are going to look at FileMaker. Then we're going to look at a PHP application with FileMaker as the backend. Then we are going to look at a Vue application, which is a JavaScript. Vue.js is a JavaScript framework talking to the data API. And then lastly, I don't know, I can't, I think I can't even see it because there are things covering my screen and I'm in presentation mode, but that last thing, we're gonna look at view and we're gonna look at something else that's not FileMaker. So we're gonna, what we're gonna do in this presentation is we're gonna review a FileMaker flow for managing a shipment for a company that moves fine art all over the world. We're gonna look at access and how that works. We'll review the web application. We're definitely gonna look at some things outside of FileMaker, but definitely relating to the data API. And for those of you who do any integration or web development, when FileMaker spits back this double colon table name and field name, that's not something that is appreciated by a lot of technologies outside of FileMaker. It usually means a static class or something else. So in order to parse the string we get back from FileMaker, you have to do a little bit of work, whether it's Python or Go or PHP or JavaScript. Nothing really likes that double colon. So I'm going to speak just a little bit about getting rid of that in the process of feeding straight JSON to a separate application. So I have a quick side about why. I think that the browser is a good target for any user, and I've been doing this a long time, so I believe that firmly. I also think that when you pivot into different technologies, you have to start off simple, and sometimes it's really nice to start off with a clean slate, and I think it promotes simplicity. A lot of FileMaker solutions tend to get super dense on the layouts and super dense with data, and what you're going to see hopefully does not do that. And I already spoke to this, but I think not WebDirect is more control and less hack. You get to use web-centric technology stacks, which we're going to review very briefly, just a high-level overview. And then you learn something new and you expand your skill set. Whoops. So, all right. This slide is about security. I want to talk about this briefly because I am not a security guru like Stephen Blackwell or Wenda Court. However, I know it's important, and when I started doing web this type of integration, it really gave me a brand new appreciation for just how rich the security model is that FileMaker gives us right out of the box. A lot of that has to do with field level access. So on this screen, you'll see that in the left column, these are how many data tables, layouts, scripts, and fields there are in this solution that we're about to take a peek at. Everything that touches the web is in that web column. So a fraction of the number of tables, layouts, scripts, and fields we touch. At the field level access, there are less than 100 fields that the entire web application reads, and we only have 3 that are that you can create or edit records. So it's super, super locked down, and this is all thanks to the security models. So in the API FileMaker file that you'll see, we've got got a privilege set that is completely locked down that the data API that this application has access to. That's not to say that each individual user has their own account. We used, and I think Ron mentioned this earlier, this solution actually uses table-based authentication. So we have got users in tables, we've got passwords, we've got two-factor authentication going, and that's all table-based. So this level of access that the application has sits on top of users just simply logging in so we know who they are. At the very bottom, you'll notice we've got 3 scripts that they're the only 3 scripts that are available to this solution. It's a login script, a set password script, and a check off pin script, which has to do with two-factor authentication. And by the way, any questions, I'm happy to take them on the fly, or you can wait, but I'm not looking for any, so I'm not checking chat or anything if anyone has any. Here's a quote that I like to remind myself of, just to make sure that I keep things simple every day with whatever I'm doing for whatever client on whatever project. And this is one of the last screens before we get into it. I just want to cover some of the technologies that are out there and then some that you're going to see today. On the far left, we have CSS frameworks that are pretty common in the web development community. This is your presentation layer. This is how HTML looks and feels and acts in a browser. And you'll see those list of frameworks. Bootstrap is very, very popular. I know even in the FileMaker community, a lot of people leverage Bootstrap if they're going to use data tables in a web viewer. So Bootstrap is very, very common. Material is a big one, Foundation. And one of the ones that I like because it's super, super simple to implement and it's responsive, which all of these are responsive, is Bulma. So that's bold because I'm using that. Then as far as JavaScript front-end frameworks go, there are just lots and lots out there, but these are sort of the bigger ones. And most of you have probably heard of these. Angular is usually more kind of an enterprise level framework. It's been around a long time for Google. React was born out of Facebook, and there are lots and lots of FileMaker developers that are leveraging React. Vue is also, I would say, one of the larger, more popular frameworks out there, and I sort of gravitated toward that. I grokked it easier than the others, which I have used before. So we'll be looking at a Vue application. But as far as a FileMaker brain goes, I would say React or Vue is definitely something that you're going to be more easily understand than Angular, just for what it's worth. And then lastly, the back end of some of what you're going to see is Node, which is a server-side JavaScript implementation, and Express.js is just a library or framework we use to do things like routing and manage the application itself. So we're not going to get in the weeds of any of this, but I just wanted to give you a high-level overview of some of those technologies that we're gonna see. And lastly, I want to point out that even though JavaScript and FileMaker and PHP are all different technologies, you can do the same thing in any of them. And I could throw 10 other languages up here. You'll see on the left, that's a JavaScript snippet of uploading or getting an item from an S3 bucket, Amazon Web Services. In FileMaker, you can do the same thing with insert URL, which we are actually going to see. And in PHP, you can see I'm leveraging the AWS SDK. I'm creating an S3 bucket, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm getting a list of objects in a bucket. So even though these are very different technologies, you can do. There's some way to leverage APIs with any of them. All right, so let's jump into FileMaker. I'm going to open that up. Hopefully, I meant to keep this closed. Let me close this out and see if this is the right file I'm opening. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay, so we are looking at a solution called Artwise. It manages shipments for artwork all over the world. And I'm going to not go through a lot of this, but we're going to jump straight to a shipment. And a shipment is something that takes place that might be scheduled out for months in advance. And on the day of, a shipment is going to take place. That means that there's a painting that's going to go from a museum in New York to a museum in Paris, and it's going to come back in 6 months. And this is everything that goes on about that shipment. So I'm going to jump into a shipment. And you're going to see a screen. You are seeing a screen that is heavy and dense with data. But I assure you, the people that use the system all day, every day, this all makes sense to them. So I'm going to spend just a moment walking you through the screen, because it's going to matter when we look at this thing in a browser. Any shipment is going to have three main players, if you will, or entities. a shipper, an agent, and a consignee, or the actual destination itself of the artwork or whatever's being shipped. We've got a place for notes. We've got a place for activities that take place during the shipment. Like, you're going to see some dummy data in here like pressure washing. That's not a real activity, but something like going through customs, or something being palletized at the cargo bay at Air France, or the crate being loaded onto the plane. Those are all activities that they want to track. So that's what activities are. Then we've got people. And you'll notice there are a lot of people associated with a shipment. And all that really matters is that some of these people are internal and many of them are external. There are people that work with the shipper or the agent. There are field operations people. There are couriers that travel with the artwork. And I can turn on or off their access right down to the shipment level. So, we've got some security we walked through earlier. Then we have the ability to allow a user in the system to be able to access the web application or not. And that is handled at their contact level. So first of all, they need authentication. Then there's two-factor authentication built in. Then they still can't really see anything unless they are attached to a shipment. And they have to have access turned on here. Not only that, but we have an expiration we can give a shipment. So if it's expired, then no one can see the shipment, period. So that's how the access works at the shipment level. And quickly, I'm going to jump through these tabs. We've got some flights here. We're going to see that flight data a little later. We've got some field operations people. These are the crates that are going onto the shipment. Trucking are the companies that may take the shipment back and forth. Then we've got the contents of the crates. We've got any couriers that are traveling with it. We've also got some documents that people will use, and we're going to visit these documents a little later. And then I won't bother with these other tabs. But so this is a shipment, right? So if someone wants to give someone access to the shipment, I can do that by viewing the shipment. I'm just going to go ahead and click this button, and I'm going to, it'll open the shipment in a portal. I can also do this, and I can copy and paste this link. And if I want to put it in an email and send it to someone who I want to give access to this. So right now I'm going to go ahead and click on the, just open the shipment. So just took me to my browser. I know what the URL is, but I'm not authenticated. So I grab the ID and I stick it in the URL so that I can, if I do log in, I can land on this shipment. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. Shipment not found or unavailable. That is what you're going to see if you don't have access or the shipment is expired. So I'm going to shoot back to FileMaker. And if you noticed, I cleared this out. So I'm going to go ahead and give it an expiration date of today. And I'm going to go back to my browser. I'm going to refresh, and there's the shipment. So I would like to point out a couple things that hopefully you're seeing yourself. First of all, this is everything. Some of this is what you've seen, but it's laid out quite differently. Hopefully it looks a lot simpler and a lot cleaner. You see we have the shipper, the agent, and the consignee all here. Every bit of ounce of data you see is coming directly from FileMaker via the data API. We've got some links to view crates. I can view the contents. I can view the contents of the crates. I can go back to the shipment. Here are my flights. I have my couriers, which I can view things called trip sheets about the courier. And here are activities that we're gonna look at shortly. But here is probably one of the main and best benefits of using these web technologies as opposed to, say, WebDirect. And if I'm not mistaken, WebDirect is not quite responsive yet. But if I take my browser and I shrink it down, you can see that this is basically mimicking a phone. So a lot of things disappear. We have menus that have collapsed. We've got everything is large and wrapped. If I scroll up to the way to the top, you'll notice that these anchors show up. So if I want to quickly get to the activities on this shipment, I can just click that and it's going to take me down to the activities. All of this you get for next to nothing, because most CSS frameworks these days are made to be responsive. So if as I grow this window out, you're going to see what this looks like. You know, as we grow, you're going to see how things start to break apart and look on a tablet. And then if we do another breakpoint, we're going to see these items disappear because we don't need them anymore. They don't make as much sense if I'm viewing this on a browser. On a desktop with all this room to grow. So so we have got our shipment here. I'm going to pivot for a moment, and we're going to go ahead and look at the information here. So this shipment, this is the shipment ID back here that you see at the top. So we're going to open up Postman, that I'm sure some of you may use for testing. It's a great tool to do testing for any APIs. It's an HTTP client. So I have got a method called getShipment. It's a post, because in FileMaker, you when you do a find with the data API, you post data, and FileMaker parses it and and returns a result. And I'm going to go ahead and send this, and we got our data back. So we're going to look at a couple of things here. We have passed the ID of the shipment. We've passed the user ID. Remember, we can check whether or not that user has access to the shipment. And we also when the user logs in, we know what roles they have. And these roles this solution is based on the party model, and we have roles and party roles and all that good stuff. So this particular user happens to have 4 roles. One of them is a manager, and one of them has web access. And that's another level of security that we can use to control who can see what. So we get our data back, and this is straight out of straight data API data. We've got our field data, and then can I collapse that? I can't. Yeah, I can. Then we've got our portal data that, for those of you who are familiar with the data API, this is simply how FileMaker returns the data. There's nothing you can do about it unless you want to sort of fudge it on the FileMaker side and return something other than native data if you want to run a script. Otherwise, this is what you get back. So we've got a lot of portal data here. There are many relationships to a shipment, and we're going to look at FileMaker in a moment to check that out. But you'll see here that I've got these activity roles. Again, here's our table name and our field name. We've got couriers, flights, field ops, cartage, which is trucking, activities, parties, shipper, agent, consignee. These are all things related to this shipment. We also have some things that we definitely do not need in this case, which is this portal data info. This is just metadata about the portals that we get back. So we don't need that either. But what we do get back is about 800 lines of JSON. It was 37K, and you see it took 1900 milliseconds. If I go ahead and do this again, it's going to be cached, and it's going to take a little. So now that's 379 milliseconds. So a little bit of improvement. You see it's still super fast, but I want to note that number there because we're gonna reference that number in a minute. So one of the things that we want to do is limit the amount of information we're sending back. It's always good to be cleaner and leaner. So I want to get rid of this portal data. I want to get rid of some of these things I don't need. And I also want to get rid of things like rest, shipment, flight, : airline code. So, so the way we do that is we're going to open our text editor, and this is the controller of this application, and it's called shipment.php. And I'm just going to quickly go to get shipment. So there's my get shipment controller. this is a really simple code snippet. We get the data that's coming from the application, which is the data that you saw me posting. And then we have a response, and that response is returned by the model. And the model is the thing that talks to the database. And the method that we're calling is, again, get shipment, and we pass the data. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at get shipment. And I promise you, you're going to see exactly where we're going. So here's our get shipment. So we get our data, we decode it, and then we basically convert it into something that FileMaker is going to understand. So we pass some things. We do some things in PHP because it's easier, and then we package it up and send it back to the data API. In this particular case, I'm using a library called FMPDA. Oh gosh, yeah, that must be it, FMPDA. It is a library written by a guy named Mark Denise. There are several libraries out there that help you communicate with the data API. I rolled my own when the data API first came out. It's not too hard, and a lot of other people have written some, and this is the one that worked best for me. Also, for those of you who have used the PHP API in the past, this is just a very slight pivot. He uses the same sort of, same terms, same nomenclature, some of the same script names even. So you just need to make some slight adjustments. And if you have used the PHP API, and as you know, that may go away. And if you're running on Linux, it doesn't exist anymore. So it's really easy to pivot to use the data API rather than the old XML interface. So getting back to this, my layout is called REST shipment. I pass some parameters I have in environment variables. And then I simply say, hey, find these records. And in this case, I'm looking for exactly one record. And then I get that result back, and FileMaker always gives us everything back in an array, even if there's one record. So this little snippet here with this 0, that's just saying, give me the first record of what I'm getting back so that I don't have to unpack it later on. I assign this to a variable called result, and then I return the result. So great. That gets us the raw data, but what I'd like to do is clean some things up. So you can see I've got some sanitized results here, and I'm going to comment my original result out. I'm going to uncomment these out. And I'm going to show you that I built a little function that gets rid of the double colons and the table names. So the first thing I do is I grab my flights from my portal data, and I create a variable called flights. Then I run it through this function called sanitize key. And then I unset, which is PHP speak for get rid of this thing called this flight. So I do that for flights, activities, activity roles, parties, and careers. I could do it for more, but for the purposes of demoing this, this is enough for you to see a good result of a difference. Another thing I do is I also unset, i.e., aka kill, cull, get rid of this portal data info that we looked at earlier. Then what I do is I rebuild an array and get rid of a lot of the junk that flows downstream. So I still have my shipment because I still need data from that primary record. But now I've got a separate new array of flights, activities, activity roles, and partners, and parties, and careers. So now that I've done this, I'm going to save it. We're going to go back to Postman. And notice we had 800 and something lines, 37K. I'm going to resend this to the data API. 365 milliseconds. We shaved it by about 10K, and we shaved it by about 100 lines of code. Most importantly, you'll see that besides the portal data that's still there, now we've got flights, activities, all these things that we talked about. And notice in my flights array, record ID, airline code, flight number, department, we've gotten rid of the field, the table names and the double colons. So why go to the trouble to do that? Any language that you're receiving this data for, those double colons can be painful to parse, which I mentioned. And so since I could do it and I wrote a function to do it, it just cleans the data up nicely. So it's much easier to deal with when you're building your HTML and you're inserting the code that you get back. So now that we have this cleaner data, we're going to look at a view application that is expecting the cleaner data. So what I've got here is a single page application written in Vue, and it's using basically the same exact API as the code that you just saw the PHP app running. So here's the PHP app, here's the PHP app. And now I'm going to log in to the Vue application with the same credentials because it's the same backend. I'm going to click on shipments. You notice things look slightly different because I'm using a different framework. But the results are very similar. I still get things like type ahead and searching. And I've already for this demo, I've already landed on I'm already loading something so I can grab the shipment that we want to compare to. So here's the same shipment we're looking at. I'm going to click on the detail of that shipment. I'm going to make this a little wider so we're comparing the apples to apples. And hopefully you're looking at this saying, gosh, that looks the same, because that was my goal. It was to get it to look the same. It's one of the ways that I teach myself is, you do something and you try something different with a different technology, but you're looking for parity. And now I know two ways how to do something. And one FileMaker often informs me about a clever way to do something in web development, and also doing things in web development also inform me on how to be a better FileMaker developer. So that's another benefit of exposing yourself to these new technologies. So once again, if I toggle back and forth, you can see that it's not exactly the same, but people wouldn't really notice the difference if they're looking at one or the other. We get the same benefits from a responsive design in Vue as well. So as I shrink this down, everything looks a little different. I didn't spend as much time cleaning this up, but for doing almost no effort, I still get all the nice wrapping and the responsiveness of the design that's gonna change out. So I've got a couple more things to show you, but one of them that usually comes up, so I'm going to go ahead and jump to it now, is I'm going to go ahead and open the API file. This solution has a UI file, an API file that has all the transactions, and then it has a data file. And the API file is the file that we hit from the web application. So I'm going to go to transactions. I'm going to, actually, I just want to run to a different layout here. REST, shipment, there we go. So the shipment that we have been looking at this whole entire time is from this layout. The layout is based on the shipment table, but you can see there are lots of related fields and plenty of portals. These portals are all necessary to drive what we want to view to the end user, to that customer or that client. So all the way back, as far as I can remember, when you access data from FileMaker, except for ODBC, you have to have context. You have to call a layout. It's got to be in the context of the layout. And if a field is not on that layout, you're not going to get it, even though it's related. So that's why all this stuff has to be on this layout, even things like UUIDs, if I'm using them. So this layout there's one shipment record, and there are probably at least 10 or 20 related records to a shipment. And hopefully, I don't know that for sure, but hopefully you all will trust that that's probably the case. And what I'd like to do now is show you a concept of, instead of having one primary record with at least a dozen related records in several different relationships. And actually, what I'm also going to do, I'm going to show this off in case anyone is interested or wants to see it. So here's the relationship graph for the API file, and everything that's this REST. You see this REST shipment. These are all the relationships that need to drive that data that we're getting back. So I'm going to show you the thing that's not FileMaker. Now, we are going to go back to view. I'm sorry, we're going to go back to the browser. We are going to look at the shipment in a different, kind of a different angle. I've got a link here that says V2 shipment. I'm going to click on it, and you'll notice when I load this, it's pretty instantaneous. If I go back to the other one, there's a little bit of more of a delay. This is FileMaker 20. No, it's not FileMaker 20. It is MongoDB. What I did was I took the data from a shipment, and I built our shipment record in MongoDB. And the way that I can prove that is I've got another tab here in my Postman called Get Shipment. Only this is looking at a Node application running on my server, looking at a MongoDB database in the cloud. So I'm going to send this shipment. Look at the time, 8 milliseconds. It's 3K because there's not as much data, but everything you see here, there's our shipper with an address, the shipment name, different IDs, the agent, consignee. We've also got flights. Here are all the contacts related. Here are, I think I saw flights. Yep. Here are the flights that are related. And if I pop back open to this browser, you can see that there's, only have one flight in here, but there's the flight. There's the, so this is using the same framework. It's a view application, only this layout, this view, if you will, or this component is not looking at FileMaker. It's looking at MongoDB. Let's see. I think I'm still doing well for time. I'd like to point out one of the advantages of getting outside of FileMaker when you're doing things like this. We're going to quickly look at VS Code, and we're going to look at the shipment detail. So this view, think of an HTML file, because that's basically what this is. This shipment detail.view file has, you can see it looks almost just like HTML, only we're bringing in some dynamic data. This is this layout. So when I view this, you notice we've got the shipper, the agent, the consignee. We have this block here for the flights. Now, in traditional HTML, everything you see here would be rendered in one HTML file. In other languages, you can certainly parse this out and have things import or export or get embedded. And some of these technologies just lend themselves to that. So if I go back to here, this flights box with these two flights in it, I'm going to do a search for flights. And you're going to see right here that I've got a grid and I've got a column here that's ready to take something. And inside that column, I've got a little block of code that says flights card. And it doesn't, you don't need to understand this at this level right now, but just know that I've got this little widget or component called flights card, and I'm passing it a value of flights, which is an array. I'm passing it the flight number, and I'm passing it the airway bill from the shipment record itself. And how I'm doing that is I'm importing the flights card. I'm importing it down here when I get rid of my HTML. you'll see this. I'm importing something and I'm calling it a flights card, and I'm importing it from a components flights card.view. And then I call that component right here. So this is the component. This is where I'm importing it. You saw where I was using it right here. And this bit right here is this file called flights card. So this file it's 50 lines of code. It's nothing. It's a table. And all I'm doing is I'm throwing the data from the data API, not MongoDB, but the data API, I'm passing it to this teeny little widget, and then I'm just doing a little loop. There's a table row. I'm looping through my flights. There's the airline code, the flight number, the departure date, and so on. And that's it. And this just gets shoved in detail. And then when this page is hit and rendered, I get a nice little box right here for flights. So that's things like that make me wish that we could do that in FileMaker. I wish that we could have layout parts that were shared across layouts, or just concepts like that. But I am about wrapping up. I hope you all got a flavor for how the data API can be a glorious thing that you never ever see when you're building web applications. And I'm open to any questions or comments or feedback completely. So I will turn it over to anyone else. If you have anything to say, I'm about done.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Michael. Yeah, let's open it up for questions. Does anybody have anything? I could probably come up with a dozen questions or so, but I'm going to go back over to gallery view so I can see everybody. So
I could stop sharing, but in
yeah,
case anyone does, I'll leave sharing
let's
for a
go ahead
moment.
and do that.
All right.
So I guess my questions really come from probably more of a, and I know you and I talked at Pause on Error, like I've done some limited stuff with PHP API, which is basically just given a user the ability to bring up a payment page on in a web browser to enter credit card information and process the payment. And it basically sends the information to the FileMaker app and runs a script, processes the payment, and returns the result. That's a whole lot more simple of a solution than what you've demonstrated here. But I guess, for me, a lot of what I'm trying to get the best out of all of this is some of the basics. So for instance, just a simple solution like that. And I think for a lot of us FileMaker developers, we probably deal with, small businesses that are doing, a very limited type of application. And most of the time, like a number of my clients, they're hosted on stuff like GoDaddy and HostGator and things like that. Do you have any kind of insight into whether the data API is something that you can work with in like that kind of hosting solution? Or is I get the sense that most of this stuff is under your control, where you've basically built and administer the server, and so you can dictate all of these frameworks and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah. Well, so everything you've seen here is running on a local environment, but I have the exact same thing running not on a local environment. For example, there's a few of these solutions that are, let's see, the web application. So the PHP part is hosted on DigitalOcean on a server in New York, which is DigitalOcean's kind of a small potatoes AWS, but I think some people know it, and I'm a big fan of it because it's very easy to manage. Then that application is hosted at a DigitalOcean server, which could be anything. It's just PHP running on a server.
Right.
And the FileMaker server is running on, we've got one that's running in AWS in Ohio, and it's serving the data API. It's running on a Linux flavor of AWS. Another one is running on a server in Atlanta. And I can point the PHP app in New York to either one of those things, as long as there's an SSL certificate and it's you know, and it's secure, and it's exposed. It's got a publicly available domain. FileMaker server, you know, it's just hitting the FileMaker server with the data API turned on. So as far as that kind of access, you don't, yeah, I do manage those, but I think most people that host FileMaker in the cloud, I also know I've worked with some projects recently where they do all their hosting, all their FileMaker hosting through Reliant. And we have set up several web applications that live outside of any Reliant server type stuff, but we're still able to access the data API because, you know, there's an SSL certificate and we have the proper security set up. So I don't know if that answers your question or
it
I
does.
want to step in a little bit, Ron, and ask you before you answer. Are you talking about using the FileMaker PHP that comes installed on FileMaker server? Is that where you're going?
Yeah, well, what I'm getting at is, and Michael mentioned it as well. I've been using. I set up a couple of small web pages that access data with FileMaker using the PHP API, which is being deprecated. Yeah, you know, and they keep warning us that that's going to go away. And then another situation that I've run into as well is that I've now got a client hosted on a Linux server through a hosting service. The FileMaker database is on Linux, so I can't use the PHP API anymore. So I have to, I have to dive into how to convert those existing solutions, which were previously hosted on servers where I hosted the page. Like for instance, one example that just has a payment page to enter a payment and submit a payment. It was on a Windows server in AWS. So I had the web server set up, I had the PHP set up and all that. The HTML and PHP pages were all served on the same server that the FileMaker database was on. You know, and I just basically managed to accomplish just a basic setup that allowed me to host that one page or two pages, or maybe it was 3 or 4 pages, but just those pages, just to bring up a page to enter a payment and submit it to the FileMaker database. That environment has changed, and we got away from the AWS server and now are hosting it on a Linux server through a host company. And so now the challenge is I've got to figure out a way to I've got to host the PHP pages that I'm going to use probably on my client's web server integrated with his website, which is a WordPress website. And so I kind of have to figure out how to work around all that stuff to put it on the WordPress website, integrate it with that, and then hit the Linux server with the data API and understand how to convert from PHP API to using data API. So.
Okay. Yeah, and that's good too. But a lot of when this question comes up, people don't realize is that when you install FileMaker server, and even when you could install the FileMaker API for PHP, that you did not have to have it on the same machine. And as a longtime web host company years ago, we definitely separated. So your database is your database, whether it's FileMaker or SQL or MySQL or Postgres or whatever. And then your API that you're using is on your web server. And so if you had that set up already, what Michael's saying is that it doesn't really matter where your data is, and it doesn't matter where that API set of classes is hosted, as long as it can point to the database.
Okay.
So, and yeah, you can, and you want to think in terms of switching from that API to using the data API, just because the other is going away. But when you think in terms of, if I separate FileMaker server hosting the data from that API, which is a set of files you can put on any web server that has PHP, then that kind of helps you say, I'm not really changing I'm just hosting those files somewhere else, looking back at the FileMaker server just for data.
Okay, so
Does
I may
that
be overcomplicating.
try to help? Yeah,
Yeah,
a little bit.
I may be
Yeah.
viewing it a little more overcomplicated because, and part of that is, I'm a FileMaker developer. I'm not a web developer. So I
Right.
have, just the basic understanding of HTML and PHP enough to put together a simple page. But when I go to, for instance, look at, okay, how can I put this page on my, hosted website with WordPress? And that just looks overwhelming to me. Like, so the
Yeah. Beverly had, she always has a lot of wise things to say, and I agree with everything she said. If you get outside of the FileMaker universe, you usually always want a separation of concerns. A database server hosts a database, and there's nothing else on it. And the application, in this case, PHP or JavaScript or whatever else, usually lives in a separate space or a separate box, or either a separate physical space or a separate virtual space. So it is, we can get our head around having those two things separate. And a lot of times for years, it was very common for us to have a FileMaker server running on Windows on AWS and an EC2 instance. And then we would stand up a very small, inexpensive Linux server that sat sort of, in your mind, they kind of sit right next to each other because they're right there in the AWS console, admin console. And that Linux server, it's just a dumb, stupid, bare bones Linux server running PHP and whatever other technologies, a LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, or some flavor of that. And your PHP just points to the IP address or the domain of that server that's sort of sitting next to it. So that was a good way to do it. And then I'll tell a 30-second story about when FileMaker 13 came out. Up until FileMaker 13, I thought it was easier in my brain to have everything on one server. So I built some pretty crazy little PHP applications talking to FileMaker, and they were always running on the same service FileMaker server. And as I got into the community more, I heard people saying, no, that's kind of a no-no. You shouldn't really do that, or you don't have to do that. And I just thought, you know what? I'm fine just having it all in the same place. And then with the advent of FileMaker 13, a lot of things changed. Some things changed and we all saw them, and some things kind of under the hood changed for FileMaker server. And Andy Lacates came to the Atlanta user group meeting within a week of FileMaker 13 being released. And there were probably 30 or 40 or 50 people there. And I remember we're all sitting in this clubhouse at someone's neighborhood association's common place by the pool. And we had a big screen up and Andy was talking, and we got into the discussion about installing all this other stuff that we all used to do and let Apache serve all these custom PHP web pages. And he said, FileMaker we are very cavalier when we install FileMaker Server 13. We just go in there and we change we do our own version of PHP. We make some changes to Apache, and without getting into granular low-level stuff, I remember a very clear warning in my head that do not put stuff on the same server as FileMaker server anymore. And even though we did for a while, we slowly got out of it. I know that there's still an HTTP folder. You can still put things in there and they work. I know that there's some solutions from Goya, FM REST, that sits on the same server. It works perfectly. The stuff you're doing works perfectly, but you don't have to do it. And if something goes wrong, it's only the database server. So that's all I have to say about that. But that story I think of often.
I guess where I'm at right now, though, is still struggling with figuring out how to convert from using the data API or from using PHP API to the data API.
The library that I had up on my screen, that FMPDA, that library is specifically designed to let you transition from the PHP API to the data API, because it uses almost the same, he uses a lot of the same class names and methods. He walks you through, if you use the data API, here are the things you have to do in order to use this. I mean, I've never used it, so I didn't care about that, but I think other people have had success. Someone else?
We've moved everything off PHP. It's not that hard, right? It's actually that was the easiest part of it, right? Because all you're actually doing is changing where you're getting your data from. I'm no longer using the built-in FileMaker PHP custom PHP option, just using data API. So that was actually the easiest part. Going farther, though, like Michael's done here, and actually changing the whole front end to use Vue, that's a whole different ballgame, which is why we're still struggling with that.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris, I didn't see your name until you started speaking, but nice to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah, I think, use case wise, probably be a long time before I endeavor into anything anywhere nearly as deep as what Michael just demonstrated. But I think, the common use cases are, putting up a payment like I described, send an email with a link that says, if you want to pay online, go here. And it just takes them to their invoice and allows them to pay. Another one that I've got coming up is a project for a convention, and they're wanting to be able to do online registrations for the convention. And so something, simple to just allow somebody to click here to go register for this convention. And, in those cases, and what I view to be especially the more appropriate use case for data API versus WebDirect is, these are anonymous users versus,
Yeah, which is why we actually it's been now, so May of last year we also had this same need. So we actually contacted Charles Delph after talked to quite a few people, and we used FM Better Forms, which actually turned out to be a really good option, because it does handle anonymous a lot better. It was definitely a learning experience, but we found folks like Mike Berge who could help us set up a really nice, really good looking user interface. Once he set that up, you don't need any Vue JavaScript skills. You can go in and just edit CSS and tweak it. So it took us about 2 weeks to get it set up, but we were actually able to get a complete site able to handle an anonymous shirt orders, take a credit card, calculate shipping, all using API calls with the backend being FileMaker, and we were live in 2 weeks, which would have been impossible if we'd done the entire thing, as a standalone site.
We had a presentation.
That's impressive.
Yeah, in this group last year, I think, didn't we, Jonathan? Are you still listening? Didn't we have a presentation on FM Better Forms?
I'm looking. Yeah, he did present last year.
Yeah. And I've watched the videos and stuff on that other as well. So yeah, I'm familiar with that enough to know that it's out there, and I may look into that as a possible solution.
I've heard nothing but good things about FM Better Forms. I've never used it personally, but I also, if I'm not mistaken, he's using Vue. In his black box. Yeah. That's cool.
He's a good guy too. I've talked to him a few times.
Yeah, he's very, very helpful, right? Spent a lot of time getting us up to speed on it.
Yeah, I often run into maybe it's a shortcoming, or maybe it's a good thing, but one of the things that I tend to want to do when it comes to things like that, rather than using a third-party solution, is to be able to figure out how to do it myself, so I know, how to do it. It's how I learn, is by figuring out how to do these things. That so sometimes I'm a little too I hold on a little too hard probably to, yeah, but I want to build it myself. I don't want to rely on somebody else's. So
Step back from the edge of the cliff.
yeah. Well, it looks like we've reached the top of the hour. So that brings us to the end of yet another edition of the Kentuckiana FileMakers Developers Group. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much, Michael. Enjoyed the presentation again, and it's great to see you again. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again at Pause on Error this year. That was a great experience last year, so it's always a pleasure. That's about it, unless anybody else has any parting comments.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks
Mike.
everybody.
Thank you. Great seeing you all. Bye.
Everybody have a great day.
Even Alan, loved Alan.
Thanks, Bev.